Research shows that around 80% of people use music deliberately to manage their emotions or mood. It's been shown to improve sleep, create a sense of safety, boost connection, and even reduce stigma. Yet, despite how instinctively we turn to music in our personal lives, workplaces rarely harness it as a well-being tool. With most organizations offering employee support by way of counseling, EAPs, and financial education, are we missing one of the simplest ways to help people feel grounded, energized, and more connected? And if so, how can music become a bridge to psychologically safe workplaces?
Why don't we have a playlist when we need to be motivated? Why don't we have a playlist for focus work?
Sure.
Let's have a playlist of tracks that can help us reach, comfortable sleep. We can use music as a more proactive tool to help manage different aspects of well-being. Music can have a positive impact on sleep, on stress management, on pain management, on motivation, on mood. And really what I want people to walk away with is the idea of, again, using music intentionally to manage our well-being.
To answer these questions, I'm joined by Rob Stephenson, public speaker and social entrepreneur, who for the last decade has used his personal story, creativity and DJ decks to challenge stigma, encourage inclusion and inspire more honest conversations about mental health in the workplace. Rob, great to meet you. Great to see you. Welcome to the Wellbeing Talk podcast.
Matt, thanks for having me. Delighted to be here, my friend.
Brilliant. So, really excited to be talking to yourself today about a range of things, including hopefully some answers to the question, how does music improve mental health at work? But before we get into that, as per usual, I'd love to hear a bit more about your personal story, very specifically because you're known for your energy, your creativity and your honesty when it comes to living with bipolar for more than 30 years. So I guess the question I'd like to lead off with is, what first motivated you to take your story public after so many years of living quietly?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think about 9 years ago, I saw the world being more open about mental health and mental ill health. Mm-hmm. And I kind of questioned a little bit why I was hiding it. I mean, I used to put physiotherapy in my diary every time I'd go and see a therapist for years, right? My team must have thought I got the worst physiotherapist in the world that cannot progress this back injury that I claim to have. And there was a good contact of mine and a fellow campaigner, Jeff McDonald, and I heard Jeff speak, and Jeff was open about his challenges of anxiety, the suicide ideation, and the loss of a good friend of his to suicide. And I thought, why am I hiding this, right? Mm-hmm. Why am I putting physio in that diary? So I decided to kind of share my story because I was, I guess, tired of masking it really and covering it up. So I did that in a pretty awkward Facebook post. But it was the reaction to that post that then sort of changed my life and direction and inspired me to try and make a difference. And the reason being is I saw so many people from my immediate network who were sharing their stories back. It was friends, it was a family member, it was some of the team members that I was worried about sharing my story with were telling me about their challenges. It was business contacts. And I'm like, wow, this is so prevalent that people are suffering in silence with their mental health. And it really motivated me to kind of change direction and try and make a difference.
So that's interesting. So if I heard you say that correctly, when you were putting, you were essentially masking some of your vulnerability and your challenges with bipolar by putting physiotherapy into your diary. And off the back of that, it was your friend Jeff McDonald, you said?
Yeah, that's right.
And so it was actually his act of kind of sharing his story, his struggles, his challenges with anxiety and suicidal ideation that made you just kind of reflect and think, do you know what, actually, if he can do it, perhaps there's something in it. Perhaps there's, a better quality of life I can have if I can be a bit more open about it.
Yeah, because it was empowering, right? Because when you are pretending to be something you're not, whatever that is.
The masking,
that's a weight. It's a real heavy weight. And particularly with your mental health, if you're feeling low and you're needing to try and kind of hide that in a workplace, that takes a huge amount of energy. And I saw Jeff speak and I thought, wow, this is liberating. And I thought, if Jeff can do it, I can do it. And if other people can do it, I can do it. And when I did it, that weight lifted.
Yes.
Right? And I'm not saying it's all easy.
No.
But if I can say to my people I'm working with, my team, my colleagues, I'm feeling pretty low today. I'm a 5 out of 10. I don't even need to explain why, but nor do I need to then try to pretend to be up. which takes a monumental amount of energy.
So through sharing vulnerability, you create a place for acceptance.
Yeah, I mean, acceptance, really powerful tool, as you know, right? I mean, I think acceptance is probably one of the tools that help me the most when I'm experiencing those depression elements, accepting that that's how I am. But I think in the context of being open, an acceptance of this is me today, and I might not be as energetic as normal. This is what I've got to offer. But if I can communicate that, then people can make adjustments around me. And I think in the wider workplace, in structured teams, if we can create those open cultures, then when people are struggling, it will be much, much easier for them to deal with that struggle and still contribute.
Yeah, no, really powerful. And, you talk a lot about being, intentional, becoming intentional with your well-being. What does that actually look like for you in everyday practice in terms of being intentional with your well-being?
So I love the word intentional and being intentional. And for me, when I was diagnosed with depression and later bipolar, you believe that the medical profession can fix you. So they can give you a pill, they can give you some therapy, and you'll be well. And I was for a while. But what happened is the depression came back. And this time it came back with a loss of hope and a sense of futility. And I can talk more about that in a bit. But what I realized is actually for me to be well and balanced, I had to be proactive about managing my well-being. I had to be intentional about managing my well-being, not just, exercising because I felt like it, or getting daylight because I felt like it, or getting, prioritizing sleep. It was actually having that intentionality of saying, I am going to proactively manage my well-being in order to stay well and balanced. And so that intention is really using well-being as a tool to manage my mental health.
So when you say intention, it's another way of saying being clear on the benefits of your actions.
Being clear, I mean, that comes with knowledge, but I think being intentional for me is about prioritizing those actions.
Right.
It's protecting those habits. It's choosing to do the things that keep you well, particularly when you're busy or when you're stretched for time, as much as you can. I mean, we're human and we're not going to be perfect. And I think you've got to be kind to yourself on the way too.
Sure.
But for me, that intention is about choosing to protect those habits that keep you well. Now, for me, it took a crisis to get to that point. Part of my mission really is to help everybody understand the benefits of doing that wherever you might be on that well-being continuum.
Can I ask about the crisis, the kind of the extreme low when you said the depression came back, and at that point you kind of didn't necessarily, it wasn't obvious how you were going to kind of come back from it. What was going on in your life at that time?
So I was about 31. I was single. I owned a couple of bars in London with some mates, and on the outside of it, it looked like I was having a pretty good time.
Right.
A lot of hedonism, a lot of partying, DJing. It looked good. On the inside, I was massively struggling. My day job, I was in recruitment. I was struggling to go to work. I was struggling to do my job. And I was coming to terms with this mental illness that I'd been diagnosed with that explained a lot of my behaviors throughout the last 10, 12, 15 years.
Sure.
But it was a new thing. And the thing with the medical profession, you're used to being fixed, right? You're used to getting some medicine that makes you better. Or if you break a bone, you put in a cast and it heals. And you for me at least, the expectation was that this treatment, this process would fix my depression, would fix the bipolar stuff. And then when it came back, I'd lost hope because I'd put my hope on the medical profession fixing me. And I realized that, and it took me some time to realize this, that actually, the medical profession can't fix you. They can help you manage, but you've got to go through a process of management. Now, that loss of hope then translated to me not wanting to be alive. And at the darkest point, I attempted to end my life. And I can remember it vividly, a beautiful summer's evening in Clapham. You could smell barbecues on the air. I was with all of my mates, again, the guys that owned the bar, a few others. We were drinking, we were laughing, we were telling stories. And you look at that scene, it was the picture of some young lads enjoying life to the fullest. When they all disappeared, I tried to end my life. And one of the lads, a guy called Johnny, Big Johnny is like a basketball mate of mine. He could pick up cars and roll them down the street. He tenderly looked after me, made sure that I received some help, took me to my therapist the next day. But what had happened to me is I'd lost hope and I'd lost the will to go on, right? Now, from that low point, with the help of continued therapy and medical profession, but also
Support network,
yeah, talking to my friends, you know, being more open about it, reading, realizing I was not alone with this stuff, I kind of learned to manage it. And that's where the intentionality of well-being came in, because I realized that exercise, sleep, connections with that support network, music, all of these things are really important in helping me stay well.
and they don't just happen.
No, I mean, some do kind of organically, you know,
But not consistently.
Not consistently.
Yeah.
But so for me, it's trying to establish, you know, there's this concept we can talk about of non-negotiables. What are the non-negotiables in terms of your well-being? And for me at that time, it was music, it was exercise, it was talking to people, and it was prioritizing sleep.
Got you. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing.
Pleasure.
Now, you have met countless people since sharing your story that have had their own challenges with mental health. You know, you mentioned from the Facebook post and, you know, so on and so forth. What has that taught you about stigma in the world today and why it still persists?
So I think stigma of mental illness certainly does still exist. I think there's been a lot of progress in raising awareness, and you know, my slogan back in the day was smashing the stigma. And I think we've gone some way in making it more acceptable to talk about your mental health, your mental illness, mental ill health, and seeking help.
Sure.
Certainly not perfect. And I think there's a really interesting question that is surveyed periodically is, in the workplace, do you feel comfortable sharing a mental health challenge with your line manager? And those stats typically are around 50%. So until we get to 100% on that, there is still a stigma. What I've learned about stigma is there's two sides to it. There is the external stigma, so actually how you will be perceived.
Social stigma, you might call that.
Social stigma, and I think that's all driven by how mental health has been portrayed over the years. Yes. Lunatic, madhouse, you know, one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
What's seen in the media, the language people use. Yes.
And so, you know, you're perceived as something a bit of a weirdo. Now that's changing. And then there's the self-stigma. And I think the self-stigma is pretty powerful, because actually when you do share your mental health challenge, those people that you're fearful of that will judge you negatively actually are very supportive. So for me, to give it a real example, I was in the recruitment world at the time. I had my own business, and I'm thinking, I want to share this story, but how will the clients that I'm working with perceive me if I do that? So I sat one of them down. I remember this conversation vividly. He's was a head of tax at one of the accounting firms. I was doing a lot of work for him. I said, look, just so you know, I'm sharing the fact that I've got a mental health challenge on LinkedIn. I'm being more open about this, and I'm trying to campaign a little bit. Just wanted you to know. And he said, one of our other partners is out with depression at the moment. Let me introduce you. And I've experienced a little bit of this myself as well. And so this was a revelation to me. I'm like, I've gone from fear of how I'd be perceived to actually acceptance and understanding and not feeling alone in a business context. And I think that self-stigma is often the thing that holds us back. I think sometimes, you know, rightly so, if you've got a toxic boss who doesn't understand, then you probably don't want to be sharing this stuff. I wouldn't advise people to do so, you know, without considering the consequences or the framework that they're in. But in my experience, you know, pretty much everyone that I've been open with has been supportive, understanding, and it's been a good experience. And I know a lot of people from the InsideOut LeaderBoard that have shared their stories. 99% of them have had a positive experience. I think one or two people said they felt their career had been held back a little bit because of what they'd done.
Sure.
But I think most people that I've spoken to wish they'd have shared their story a bit earlier. And I think that's all to do with that weight lifting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting because yeah, a lot of the times when we think about stigma, generally speaking, it's the external things. It's how people talk, everything that we mentioned already, and I agree as well. You know, it's probably not a good idea to share things with people that you're not 100% sure that they've got your kind of best interests at heart. So the context in which you share things at work or anywhere else is, yeah, obviously it should be taken into account. But actually, I think there's a real nugget there in terms of you know, turning the arrow inwards and thinking about how you manage your relationship to that internal stigma, because ultimately that's something that you're in control of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you know, I would be one of those people. I think I benefited from being more open,
Mm,
and you know, I wished I'd felt comfortable doing that earlier in my career,
yeah.
because you know that weight is heavy. That weight of pretending is heavy, and that's in terms of any aspects of your identity, right? If you can't be yourself, then that takes a lot of energy to maintain and to handle that weight. And I wished I could have relieved myself of it much earlier.
Yeah, like you say, it stops you from, and the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? Because the moment that you did that, you know, you started to connect, and you know, with like-minded or people that had similar experiences, and it's kind of snowballed from there by the sounds of it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Fair
You know, and
play.
I've met some wonderful people on this journey of, you know, of being open about mental health, and you know, it's been a very empowering and uplifting, you know, 9 years that I've been doing this now.
Mm. So let's zoom out, thinking about the wider mission. You know, because your work spans a lot of initiatives. That's projects such as cycling the Tour de France route, launching a tech platform like FormScore. Um, what would you say is the deeper question that you're trying to help people ask themselves throughout all of this?
Well, I'd sort of describe my overall mission as helping to inspire the creation of mentally healthy workplaces where people feel equipped, empowered, and have permission to prioritize their well-being.
Mm,
And sort of everything I do and have done, it falls within that mission. I think to specifically answer your question as to what question am I asking people to think about with this,
yeah.
it's it's really, I think, linked to that idea of where does well-being sit for you as an individual, and how can you benefit from being more intentional about managing your well-being? Because I think a lot of people only start to look at their well-being when they hit a crisis.
Yes.
You know, in fact, I often ask this question, right? I say, look, you know, when I'm doing keynotes, is, you know, who's brushed their teeth today? And until last week, I had 100% hit rate of everybody putting their hand up, and I've done this for years.
Yeah, you'd hope so, wouldn't you?
You'd hope so. One chap boldly said he hadn't had time to brush his teeth this morning last week, which was highly amusing.
Fair play.
But yeah, we're trained to brush our teeth.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got kids, then you're badgering them to brush their teeth. You know, it's one of the big challenges with my son. Go and brush your teeth. Go and brush your teeth. We're not so well trained, and certainly my generation is not trained at all to look after our well-being, right? And so, you know, we need inspiring to do so, but not when we hit a crisis. And that's what it took for me to do it. So again, this mission really has evolved from smashing stigma and getting people to talk about mental ill health to actually inspiring people to think about managing their well-being proactively.
I like that, and it's interesting. So there's a book I read by Jordan Peterson. I mean, he's written a few, but I believe this one, it's either the 12 Rules for Life or 12 More Rules for Life, or one of the two. And he talks about just the human psychology of keeping things simple. Because you talk about like training and how we're trained to brush our teeth. Well, we're also trained to essentially only really look at the big picture, only really consider how things work when they go wrong. Well-being is one example, but I can use, for example, if we talk about a car, and this is the one that's in the book. You know, a car is a vehicle to get us from A to B. You put fuel in it, pump up the tires, pay your tax and MOT, go, right? And we never really have to think about it as more than just this vehicle for getting us from A to B until it goes wrong. And then when you're hearing something going wrong in the engine, or you're stuck on side of a motorway, you're then thinking about the pistons, the combustion, you're thinking about the brake fluid, you're thinking about all of the nuts and bolts and all of these electronic systems that are thousands of systems essentially that are working together, and components that are working together to make this thing work. But you only think about it when it goes wrong. And I feel like there's a synergy there. There's an analogy there for what you've just said there about in terms of we don't think about our well-being, all of these different systems, all of the different dimensions of well-being. We don't think of those until it goes wrong in terms of how it relates to us.
Yeah, I think with the car analogy though, we probably do put a bit more thought into that. If we've got a long journey, we might make sure the tyres are pumped up or the oil is topped up.
Sure.
We will get it serviced on a yearly basis. There's legal provision around an MOT for older vehicles that has got to go through, right? So I think that is proactive management. I think actually where our well-being is concerned, a lot of us will wait till something does truly go wrong before we even think of doing the similar things, and that self-reflection, with form score you mentioned, how am I today, using a score out of 10, how many of us do that? We kind of do it with our physical health. We'll get out of bed and think, I've got a bit of a sore throat or my back hurts a little bit. How many of us truly do that, excuse me, with our mental health? And that self-reflection, I think, is something that can be hugely beneficial from people as the starting point to understand, what do I need to be at my best? Is it more sleep? Am I feeling stress because of all of the deadlines I've got? Am I ruminating over things? Would journaling help get a few of those things out of my head? Am I prioritizing properly? Am I being nourished by my relationships?
Reminds me, actually, just on the form score, it reminds me very loosely of the mood elevator.
Yeah.
Yeah. Larry Sen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it essentially is that graph of a graph of human emotions, everything from at the bottom being judgmental, self-righteous, etc., all the way through to feeling collaborative, open-minded, and grateful at the top, and then in the middle you've got the curiosity. And again, it really just helps people to be, again, more intentional, turn the hour inwards and think, well, where am I on this mood elevator and what buttons do I need to press? Because it's going to be different for me, for you, and for everybody, right? What buttons do I need to press to get me, further up, whether it's staying curious or actually just taking the time to consider on a daily basis, what am I grateful for?
Yeah, I mean, gratitude is huge. But there's one thing that I've done over the years that just gives me the most amount of joy on this mission.
Sure.
And if you can try this in any of your training sessions or talks, but if you get a group of people to reflect on their well-being, give themselves a score out of 10, where 10 is the best they can be, 1 is crisis and struggling.
Right.
Think about what is driving it. And then the magic is if you get them to talk to somebody next to them and share the score and share as much as they're comfortable sharing as to what's driving it, it's magic, right? Because you see eye contact, smiles, laughter, human engagement, the volume goes up and up and up. You can barely shut the room up.
Yeah.
I've done it to 1,000 people. I've done it to 10 people. I've done it online. And every time what happens is that little bit of vulnerability creates a bit of trust, and then that creates human connection within some work colleagues. And it's absolutely magical if we can do that in a group. And that's been a real part of my mission, is try to get people to open up and talk about their well-being, because it's one of the great things that we can connect on.
Yeah. I've got to admit, that's a bit of a nugget. I'm definitely using that at some point. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. So, you've described your work as a mix of activism, creativity, and community building. If you had to name the underlying value that drives all of it, what would it be?
I think the underlying value is, authenticity. I think it's authenticity about being who you are. And if you apply that to well-being, it's understanding, who am I, what do I need, and then prioritizing that. But I think it's authenticity, it's vulnerability, and it's openness. To give you 3 values, you've asked for 1, but I think it's all sort of connected.
They all intersect.
So as I say, for me, I'm trying to get people to understand the importance of well-being, both individually and organizationally. And then how practically can you go about creating either an individual well-being habit or a well-being culture in a team? And it starts with asking that question, how am I today?
Sure.
And it starts with understanding what might be driving it. And then it gets to that intentionality we were talking about, and having a few habits that you protect in order to stay well, particularly when you're busy, particularly in high performance environments.
Sure. So thinking now about perception, what would you say is one misconception that people have about your mission when they first meet you or hear about you
Well, I think this,
and the work that you do?
yeah, I think this speaks to the stigma of mental health itself. So people hear the words mental health and they immediately think of illness, right?
True.
So mental health, what are the images? Suffering, head in hands, depression, anxiety. Whereas mental health, it's beautiful, it's vibrant, it's about being human, it's about having energy, it's about connecting, it's about having purpose, it's about helping others. There's lots of beautiful things that come from our mental health.
So many different sides to it that unfortunately in a lot of conversations do get reduced to, the negative, like you say, the illness.
Yeah, correct. So I think that's the misconception is, if I try to explain what I do, people will immediately go to illness and say, what, are you a therapist or a counselor, or are you helping people when they're sick? And I'm like, no, what I'm trying to do is look at this from a positive perspective as the benefits of prioritizing our mental well-being. And I think that's the true stigma, is people don't think they need to prioritize their well-being until they get sick. Whereas if you look at any sporting hero, any sporting great you'd care to mention, I often use the example of LeBron James because I used to be a basketball player.
Sure.
And LeBron has performed at the top of the NBA for 22 years. I think his 22nd year now.
It's been that long.
It's been that long.
Wow.
And still at that peak of the game. But he doesn't do that by pushing himself without recovery, without rest, without recharging. And any athlete will tell you is you improve when you're resting. You have the training stimulus to create that improvement, but then you rest. If you look at the average corporate athlete, they think they're superhuman. They think they can go from back to back to back, meeting to presentation to pitch to stressful situation with no breaks in the day, compromising their drivers of well-being. And then we wonder why we've got a burnout crisis.
Yeah,
right?
they're invincible until they're not.
Yeah. So I think that misconception of what mental health is, what well-being is, and why we should all care about it, both at individually, team, and organizational level, that's the misconception I'm trying to address.
Understood. So I'd like to talk a bit about your career as a public speaker.
Yeah.
Some of the lessons from that, because you've spoken on stages all over the world, including TEDx, about authenticity, storytelling, and now delivered, I believe it's close to 1,000 talks.
Pushing 1,000, yeah.
Pushing 1,000. That's impressive. What have the audiences you've spoken to taught you about what people actually need when it comes to mental health conversations?
I think what I've learned is that when people can be open about this topic, then that's where positive change can happen. So I gave you the example of people sharing their well-being scores, their form scores with each other, and it being a real positive experience. When I've done a lot of interviews of senior leaders where I've got them to either talk about their mental health challenges, or even just their well-being, their non-negotiables, their foundations. And when a leader does that, that then creates this culture of permission, psychological safety, and sends a strong message that it is okay for team members to prioritize their well-being because the leader's doing so. So for me, I think the theme across all of the talks and events that I've done is when we can be truly open about our mental health and well-being, that's how we start to address that problem, that stigma, and that misconception that well-being is something we should only prioritize when we're struggling. It starts with openness and it starts with vulnerability.
And thinking more specifically about the TEDx, which is an amazing place to be. Hopefully I'll get there one day myself. What would you say is a core lesson from the TEDx experience that's stuck with you?
So my TEDx was a lockdown TEDx,
right?
Which meant no audiences and it was recorded. And that threw up sort of an interesting dilemma for me, because I wanted the TEDx experience of putting myself under pressure. At the time I was doing literally probably 10, 15 webinars a week for clients.
Yes.
Where I was speaking to a camera and a screen. So I got pretty good at that, whether it was with a chat, with a red dot, with whatever, I could deliver it.
Yeah.
But with that, you've always got your material to hand. You know, you've got your slides on the screen or whatever. And I thought I could do my TEDx that way and it would be good.
But that's not the real experience.
That's not the real experience, because what's missing there is performance tension.
Yes.
So I'm a big fan of Fred Again musically, if you know Fred Again.
I've heard of the artist. Remind me of a song of theirs.
So he did the one "We've Lost Dancing"
Right.
through. It was called Maria. "We've Lost Dancing."
Okay.
That was a big lockdown track, but he's done quite a lot. But he was a producer to people like Stormzy and Ed Sheeran before doing his own material.
Got you.
When he started releasing his own material, and it's all electronic, he was like, when I do a live show, I don't just want to be kind of pre-recorded or whatever. I want to create performance tension. So he's got a kind of drum pad and he's doing the beats live on these shows, and you see it and you see the effort going in. And I always found that really inspiring. And this feeling was the same for my TEDx. So I wanted to create performance tension in a recorded fashion. So I just basically went through the same process I would have done as if I was speaking on the red dot in front of 1,000 people. I memorized my talk. I had my cue points. I thought about how I wanted to deliver the talk, and then I shot it to camera with no notes. And I did this early in the morning. I lived in a converted farm at the time, so it was quite cool. It was sun coming up, beautiful summer's morning, and there were a bunch of my audience was a bunch of sheep that actually just buggered off right during the talk, so they weren't particularly engaged with what I was saying. But what this did was give me that performance tension, because I had no notes. I was speaking to a camera. I did it in one take. I didn't edit it. In fact, no, that's a lie. The only thing I edited, one of my neighbours came back and drove the car back, so that's the only thing I edited out, because I wanted to deliver what I would deliver on a TED stage.
Yeah, sure.
And I was pleased I did that, because it made it feel unique and different from a regular webinar that I was doing. And for me, the craft of speaking is important. I love it. It's probably the best thing, or one of the best things that I do. I get a huge amount of energy from doing it. I give a lot, and I'm really comfortable on stage now, and I love it. And I wanted to kind of create that with the TEDx, and I think it does come through when you watch it back.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? That says a lot about your mindset, the true growth mindset, because, in that scenario there, a lot of people could have been forgiven for actually just, kind of doing it the way that they'd always have done it, with the notes and everything, nice and safe. And you would have missed out on a lot in terms of the opportunity to grow. You actively sought out, some way to motivate the task engagement, performance stress. Did you call it?
Yeah. Performance tension.
Performance tension. Yeah. You actively sought out a way to manufacture that in the environment so that you could get the growth that came with it, which I think is really, really impressive.
Yeah. It was fun.
Okay, so I have a question to follow up on that, but there was something that kind of just cropped up in my mind. And, we've spoken a bit about, leadership and authenticity and, the benefits of that kind of cascading effect of helping your team members to feel more psychologically safe by sharing. I've heard this in some of the audiences that I've delivered to. It's something that comes up, and it's maybe a more cynical point of view from some people in the workplace, especially in high performance environments, whereby they may be under the impression that by sharing and being vulnerable as a leader, that they may open up a can of worms by way of, I don't know, it having some kind of negative effect on morale, because maybe people start oversharing, etc. I don't know if you've heard that before, but in any event, what would you say to people with that position?
So, I think, firstly, as a leader, I've always said this: only share what you're comfortable sharing.
Right.
And I think, over the years, I think it was important for leaders to share mental health challenges and mental illness. I think it's more important these days for leaders to get behind the well-being agenda. And so if a leader's comfortable talking about depression or anxiety or whatever they might have experienced or be going through, that is brilliant. That has a positive impact. But I also think a leader sharing as to the 2 or 3 things, their well-being foundations that they do each week to stay well, has an equally positive impact. So I think don't overshare if you're a leader. I think in terms of some of the worry about how that might land, I haven't particularly heard people talk about, is that going to result in oversharing? The one I have heard is that if a leader shares, are people then going to be, taking time off because of their mental health challenges more? And to be honest, it might, and we want that, know, because what will happen if you create a more open culture is actually people will then feel safe in saying, I'm off work today because of my mental health, rather than saying I'm off work because of a back injury or a stomach upset. So your mental health stats your mental illness stats will go up,
right?
Which you kind of want to know the real picture.
True.
And then that open culture will allow you to then put provision in place and put wellbeing resources in place and create a culture of wellbeing that hopefully will help those people manage their condition and be in the workplace more. So I've heard that worry quite a lot, that if we open up this can of worms, we're going to get all these people going off sick. Yes, you might, but they're going off sick anyway. They're just putting down something else, right? And so I think we need to be bold and brave on this. And if there are some organizational, I guess, structural issues that are causing this, whether that's kind of overwork or under recovery or not enough resource, whatever it might be, we shouldn't be afraid to try and uncover that. We might not be able to address it all immediately. It's the real world we're in, but let's know about it. Let's crack open that can of worms and have a look at what's going on inside. But I don't think we should worry about it. And I think that's where you'll get the difference between those organisations that are perhaps ticking a box and saying this stuff because they feel they have to, or leaders that genuinely care and want to be followed for the right reason.
Got you. Okay, so back to public speaking. Now, speaking publicly about mental health can be both empowering and emotionally taxing. How do you manage the vulnerability hangover, so to speak, when it comes to sharing your personal stories in a public space?
Yeah, Matt, to be honest, I do not get one, right? I do not get that vulnerability hangover. For me, every time I share my story these days, I find it cathartic. I find it's like real-time therapy. I find it uplifting. And I guess over the years, my talks have evolved that it's less of me sharing my personal story. As I say, I'll always ground it in my personal story, but that might be 5 minutes, where in my earlier talks, it might have been 35 minutes. So, but I never did get that kind of, that come down from it, because for me, being open and sharing my story is, each time I do it, I find it energizing and reaffirming of that mission of being open and the fact that I'm not carrying that weight I was discussing earlier. So I think I'm fortunate in that respect that I don't get that kind of hangover. I'll tell you what I do get though.
Go on.
Is in my music and mental health shows, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. I definitely get a performance come down, right?
Yeah. So it's one hell of a high you create by the sounds of things.
Yeah, because there is more stress that goes into that performance because, and I'm a kind of one-man band on it. So I'm the roadie, I'm setting up a sound system.
Yeah.
So there's pressure to set up on time, there's loading in, there's loading bays, there's all of that. And then once I've done all of that, that's about an hour and a half. I'll then hopefully have some time to decompress, and then I have to perform. And the performance is both public speaking, sharing my story, but then also performing musically. And there's performance tension in that because it can always go wrong. And so then if it goes well, there's a big high. And then I've got to pack up my stuff, put it in the car, and drive home. Yeah. Right. And so there's a definite come down for that. So I've learned that I need to manage that, and I tend to manage it through music. I'll choose the music I want to listen to on that car journey home, and it may
being intentional.
Intentional again.
Yes.
And it may be, it may be I need some uplifting music to give me a boost. More often than not, I like to listen to BBC One's Power Down playlist, which is more by Shana Larry, this Welsh DJ presenter who's got this beautiful soporific Welsh accent and plays the more chilled aspects of electronic and other music. And it just kind of allows me to drift down a bit. But back to Fred again. After his shows, he'll tend to put a party on somewhere. He'll be on a rooftop or be in the green room with inviting a few people back, because to go from that high to zero,
it's quite an extreme.
It's quite an extreme, and it can feel like depression. It isn't, but it can feel like that to me. So again, I've got to be quite intentional about managing that. But I think back to your point about vulnerability hangovers, it does concern me a little bit, because I think people with mental health challenges and mental illness challenges often want to share their story, and will do so and want to be campaigners, and then will find that it is negatively affecting their mental health because of that reason. And I think it's really important to make sure, if you are sharing your story, particularly for the first time, you're well supported, you've got your support network around you. If it does trigger you, you know where you can go, whether that's therapy or EAP schemes or whatever, because it can be quite triggering if you don't do it regularly. And even if you do it regularly, it can be triggering. For me, fortunately, I find it uplifting.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's been a bit of a journey where you've kind of refined how you tell that story, and making it even more, let's say, relatable to the benefits that you want the audience to take from it, as opposed to it being solely about your story, as almost another layer of protection there as well.
I think when you're an experienced public speaker, your talk is effectively a commodity, right?
Yeah.
Because you do it so regularly. And you only kind of realise that when you start. I'm doing a new keynote at the moment, so I'm starting to realise I've got to learn all this again, and it's you're living it. And so when I say a commodity, my story is always very authentic, always genuine, but it would come in the same place. I'm used to telling it. I know how to tell it. I know how to make people feel the empathy towards it. I know how to stop it going too deep and using a bit of humour as I come out of it.
Yeah, you can read the room with it.
And you read the room with it. So in that respect, it's a performance, and most public speakers will have that. And I think the trick is to still be authentic and genuine about what you're saying, but also understanding that actually you don't. I can talk about those dark times, without going there every time.
Yes.
Without reliving it every time, because I've spoken about it a lot.
Yeah.
At the start, probably I did get more of that, kind of that feeling of drained, feeling of, I've shared a lot here
of yourself. Yeah.
And again, I'd be kind to myself and make sure this space. But even now, right, if I'm doing, if I do 2 keynotes in one day, I'm making sure the next day is an easier day, because it does. You still, you're in a flight or fight response when you're performing. I'm in a flight or fight response now, speaking to you, even though it's a relaxed, enjoyable conversation.
I hope so.
It is. It is. But if we're not activated, then we come across as really flat.
Exactly. We're not motivated to engage with the task.
Yeah. But you did one of these recordings this morning. You then had a break. You didn't go straight into doing this one, and that's the same. We've got to allow our nervous system to reset.
Got you.
Which is back to what we were talking about before. It's kind of, you can't keep going back to back to back, flight or fight response, and expect no impact.
And you know what? That's interesting, because that's probably one of my biggest concerns, let's say, when it comes to doing these recordings or going somewhere to deliver a talk, is not having that time between kind of, waking up really early to travel to wherever it is in the country, get your breakfast, get your coffee, whatever, set up, get the room right, and then not having that time, even if it's 15 minutes, just to, like you say, decompress, just sit in silence and just contemplate the potential of the day and, the task ahead. That's probably a bigger concern for me than anything that could possibly happen in a public speaking environment.
Yeah, and look, there's some simple things you can do, and this applies to any stressful event, but I would always do them before a keynote, is a bit of breath work, box breathing, in for 4, hold for 4,
Sure.
out for 4, hold for 4, a few rounds of that. Yeah, close your eyes, a bit of visualization. You know, again, I don't need to do this as much as I used to, but last week I was doing, as I say, the new keynote, and I was doing for the same client a bit later one of my music shows that I'd only ever done online before. So both were new. And so there I'd be using a sort of visualization technique of saying, okay, I can imagine this going well. I can imagine, you know, how it was happening in the room. I can imagine the response to new things that I hadn't tried before. And yeah, because we think in images, we don't think in words. That visualization, you can sort of trick your mind into believing that it will be so, which then relaxes you and reduces the cortisol and stress hormones. So I think any of those nervous system regulation tips, you know, can be really, really helpful before a stressful event. Music is another one, right? That relaxing music before a stressful event will reduce the perception of stress in the event itself.
Yeah, got you. And definitely we're going to talk about the neuroscience and this link between music and mental health very shortly. I did want to talk about a bit more about the leadership side of things, openness, and also just the future of mentally healthy workplaces, because, you know, you've pushed for, you know, a culture where leaders model openness. We've spoken about this just a little while ago, but also very specifically in terms of the InsideOut LeaderBoard. You know, that shook things up in terms of spotlighting senior leaders with lived experience of a mental health challenge or mental illness. So when you started the LeaderBoard, what were you trying to shift in leadership culture?
So I remember a conference that Legal & General put on, and it was called Not a Red Card. It was a mental health conference that you know they invested in. Gabby Logan was the MC, and the first one was at Twickenham, and I went as a guest, and I subsequently spoke at the next few of them. But there was a big round table exercise, and that was addressed look into like, what are the problems with mental health in our workplaces. There were about 200 people in this room, and the CEO then of Legal & General, Nigel Wilson, summed up, and he said the number one thing that has come out of today is we do not have enough senior leaders who are sharing their stories of mental ill health. And I kept hearing that everywhere. You know, there was a lot of stuff, good stuff going on around awareness and training and all of that, but less on kind of leadership. Now, I used to work with a guy in recruitment called Suki Sandhu, now Suki Sandhu OBE, and Suki developed a lot of they're called power lists, right? Where he would recognize people in business, LGBTQ, kind of gender lists, BAME lists as well. And I thought, could we do something similar of a published list of individuals in leadership positions who are open about mental ill health? And that was where I thought I could contribute to try and address that problem. We do not have enough voices from our leadership who are open. And many people said, you will never be able to do this. You won't get the role models to put their names to it because of the stigma.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, well, let's find out.
Yeah, challenge on. Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. And so I was basically from a recruitment background, as I told you, and it was basically a big networking exercise of trying to uncover people who were in a position of leadership and had experienced a mental health challenge. And it was, I think, a lot easier to find people than I thought it was going to be. And when I presented my idea, I think pretty much I was maybe turned down once out of, I think the first LeaderBoard was about 60 people, 70 people, something like that. Because it was at a time where people were feeling a little bit like I was, in that they wanted to be more open. They wanted to not be hiding this condition. And so that was the kind of the motivation behind it. But also, you know, what I found was there was I think it was the right time, the right place, that there was a demand for people to be more open.
So What did you learn from the leaders that were brave enough to step forward?
I think I learned from those leaders who were brave enough to step forward that mental ill health is not something that necessarily holds you back. And indeed, for many of them, their mental health challenge has driven them to prove themselves and get into that position of leadership. That was the first thing. Secondly, I learned that actually when a leader shares their story, more importantly, that can have a huge effect on the culture in their workplace. So I'll give you an example. I remembered this one as I was walking up because the client used to be based around here. There was a guy called Mark Twigg who was a founding partner of a financial PR business called Cicero. They used to be based just over there. And Mark shared his story of clinical depression to his whole workforce. And there were about 100 people in the business at the time, small business. And when he shared his story, what he then got was 2 or 3 people who put their hands up and said, I'm experiencing a challenge too. They were then able to get support. And certainly one of them, he had a long, successful career with the firm. And Mark felt that that person would probably have not stayed with the firm otherwise. So again, that person could get support and enjoy a career with them. And then the narrative moved to proactive well-being. So they introduced a real simple concept called Take Two. 2 hours in the working week for people could do, with permission, anything they wanted to prioritize their well-being. So flexibility, but permission. Some people would go to the gym, others would take a long lunch. Some people might come in a bit later one day, whatever it was, whatever worked for them.
Sorry, I've got to ask, what was, let's say, the most, let's say, out there thing that anybody chose to do? if you can recall.
That is an obvious question and one I should have asked that I don't think that I did.
Fair enough.
But I think there were some nice ones, like people would get together and go to an art gallery together.
Okay, different.
That's different.
Tame, different, yeah.
I don't think they would go to day raves or anything like that.
I wondered, you know.
But I think a lot of it was exercise. I think it fell into buckets of sort of exercise, diary management, so taking time when you need it, or human connection, so lunches with colleagues, longer lunches with colleagues or whatever. But so what that came from is the leader being open, then put this all on the agenda and allowed all of this to happen. And even the reputation of the firm spread beyond their walls to the point where there was this other chap who worked for Mark for a number of years afterwards, who was, like myself, bipolar, felt comfortable sharing the fact that he was bipolar in the interview process because he heard of the reputation of the firm. On getting the job, Mark could then work with Rob to understand how best to manage someone with bipolar. I think he even had a conversation with permission with Rob's therapist. And Rob didn't have a single episode of hypomania while they were working together because Mark was looking out for him. So some really great things can come from the fact of our leaders being open.
What would you say to the leaders that want to be more open about their mental health but aren't quite sure where to start?
I think if you are comfortable talking about any challenges you've got, great. But what I've learned over the last few years is if you can simply share things like a time where you found work to be challenging and needed to prioritize your well-being. Now that could be anything. I've asked lots of leaders this question. It could be a relocation. It could be a particular transactional busy period. It could be a period of change. It could be a new role, whatever it might be. If you can share that and then what you do around your well-being or what you did around your well-being to manage that change, that process, that difficult situation, then that can speak volumes to your direct reports, to people in the team, to people in the wider business about the fact that it is okay and encouraged to prioritize well-being. So for me, that's where my narrative has moved to, really. It's less about the need to share a mental health challenge.
It could be a practical example.
Yeah, but it's more to share things that you do for your well-being.
Got you.
So I'll give you another example, and the whole concept of well-being foundations that I've been building in the last few months came from a leader at PwC.
Right.
And he leads the transactions tax business. So they get very busy, on deals, work long hours. His idea of sharing those 2 or 3 things that keep you well each week, and he shared his own, so that created permission. He invited the team to share theirs with each other. It created social proof.
Mm-hmm.
But what it also created was when the transaction did get truly busy and people were struggling to meet their foundations, their habits, whether that's five-a-side soccer or whether it's getting home to put young children to bed or whatever it might be, he found that people were helping each other hit those well-being habits. Hey, you haven't been to that five-a-side soccer match. What can we do to make sure you hit it next week? People were supporting each other on their non-negotiables.
So it creates some accountability.
It creates both accountability, but it also creates collective resilience or collective support on helping people meet the things that keep them well.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, getting back to your question, if you're a leader that wants to get behind this agenda,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't need to be a mental health challenge. It
Yes.
can just be sharing what you do as a leader to prioritize your well-being.
Love that. So, Rob, we've spoken quite a bit about stigma and the importance of leading by example. When it comes to creating psychologically safe workplaces, what are the gaps that you still see today?
So a psychologically safe workplace is where people feel that it's okay to speak up, to have an opinion, to make a mistake, to admit to a mistake, to contribute. And I think in the context of well-being, psychological safety is, do you feel comfortable doing the things that keep you well,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's exercise, whether that's social connection, whether that's boundaries, whatever it might be. And I think the other bit is, do you feel comfortable seeking help when you're struggling? And would you feel comfortable discussing that with your line manager? If all of those things are yes, then you're probably in a psychologically safe team.
Okay.
The question is to what is preventing that happening?
Sure.
What is challenging that? I think there's an old school way of leading, which is by fear, that is still quite prevalent in a lot of organizations. So you will work this way because I'm telling you to do so, and if you do not, these will be the consequences. Whereas psychological safety is a more enlightened view of, okay, we're all in this together. Let's work together to a common goal,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to trust you as an employee to have some autonomy and bring the whole self to work, and ultimately do the job and potentially make some mistakes that we all learn from, but we're going to talk about it. That's a very different way of leading, and it requires a different leadership style that is not old school leadership style. I think when you talk about psychological safety in the context of well-being,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still a view out there that well-being is a soft and fluffy, perhaps a benefits issue and something to focus on when people start struggling. There's a lack of understanding at many layers of leadership and with many leaders that well-being is an essential component of sustainable performance. And the research will tell you that it is. Oxford University have done lots of good stuff on this, kind of well-being and productivity, well-being and company performance, well-being and talent attraction, all of that. But I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding that well-being is an important thing to focus on amongst all of the other things that managers have to focus on.
Well, you mentioned research, and actually that helps me to transition quite nicely to my next talking point, which was about music and mental health. So, the research shows that around 80% of people use music deliberately to manage their emotions or mood. And it's been shown to improve everything from sleep to creating a sense of safety, to boosting connection, and even reducing stigma. Yet, despite how instinctively we turn to music in our kind of personal lives, workplaces rarely harness it as a tool, as a well-being tool, that is. And I guess that kind of brings us quite nicely to one of your more creative projects. I mean, they're all creative, but this one in particular, Harmonising the Mind, which, as I understand it, combines DJing with storytelling to inspire more open conversations. So, the first question here is, for people who haven't seen or heard about Harmonising the Mind, how do you describe it?
Harmonising the Mind is, if you can imagine, smashing together my two passions of public speaking and DJing.
Sure.
And then seeing what came out. That's what Harmonising the Mind is. So it's it's a show that uses. I'll bring in a sound system and DJ equipment to a workplace. The show uses music to help illustrate some of the concepts of well-being. So, for example, this is what building a well-being habit looks like. You might start with a walk, you might then walk with a friend, you might then prioritize your sleep, focus on your nutrition, but you layer on different things. I'll illustrate that using the kind of beats of a song. So I'll start with the kick drum, that's the walk, and then I'll add in the clap. That might be walk with a friend. I'll add in the hi-hat. That might be then focusing on sleep. And then, I'll basically build up a track from scratch to illustrate the fact that there's a bit of trial and error, and you've got to kind of add on bits and pieces, try different things. So that's kind of fun. I'll also then use music to illustrate this is what depression feels like, where I'll take a track and I'll slow it down, distort it, to give that sense of kind of walking through thick mud and the fact that things are overwhelmingly difficult. I'll then use two versions of the same song, but one of them pitched at a different tempo and a different key to illustrate anxiety, because that clash as it goes round and round in the head feels pretty horrible, but it's like that sense of things feeling wrong. I've then got a fun one where I smashed together about 30 classic house samples really quickly to illustrate hypermania, ADHD. It's fun, it's recognizable. Sometimes there'll be 3 or 4 samples playing at the same time. Invariably it goes wrong at some point, but it's fine. But it's illustrating a concept using music. And then I think in the sort of the more public speaking elements, it's around helping people understand some of those things that you mentioned, that music can have a positive impact on sleep, on stress management, on pain management, on motivation, on mood. And really what I want people to walk away with is the idea of, again, that word again, using music intentionally to manage our well-being. Because I think that stat you mentioned, I think we do use music deliberately, but it's a bit more organic, right? It's a bit more, okay, I'm feeling sad right now, I need to listen to this sort of music, or I need a bit of get up and go, I need to listen to this sort of music. What I'm suggesting is, why don't we have a playlist when we need to be motivated? Why don't we have a playlist for focus work?
Sure.
Let's have a playlist of tracks that can help us reach, comfortable sleep. And then we've got a resource to tap into that can help us be proactive and, again, intentional about managing well-being through the power of music.
Sounds like so much fun. I think I could talk to you for a lot longer about this. We could have probably done a whole episode on this one, just lots of questions going around in my mind at the moment. But one in particular, I mean, just in terms of, let's say, trends, what trends do you notice in terms of, let's say, moments that are created during these workshops that kind of really stand out?
So I think the big light bulb moment for people is that most people have a relationship with music. Kind of 90% of the human race listens to music regularly.
Sure.
So most people have a relationship with music. But the big light bulb moment for people with their well-being is we can use music as a more proactive tool to help manage different aspects of well-being. I think that's the big kind of eye-opener.
Sure.
I think the other one, which is an obvious one, and I find this in all of the workshops, is music is a wonderful connector. It brings people together. And I think it's beautiful because we all have very unique music tastes. So what I like is not necessarily going to be what you like or the next person.
Sure.
But actually, music is a great way of bringing us together. So one of the exercises will be, right, here's an example of a track that I would play to help sleep. What have you got in the audience? What's the track that would help you sleep? And the range of answers you get is hugely different, okay? And so actually from a workplace or a collection of friends or colleagues or whatever it might be, sharing these ideas as to what music works in certain situations helps us feel that a little bit more connected. Okay. And I think many workplaces have then taken this idea and have put together their Friday afternoon playlist that people can contribute to, which opens up new music that understands you. We get into different cultures and stuff like that. And I think that's the real nice byproduct of what I've been talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the idea of it just that the light bulb moment of helping people just to, like you say, think more proactively about how they can use music to influence their mood, having set playlists for being motivated, for winding down, for whatever it is that they're going through, the moments of connection. Also, I think there's something there just in terms of helping people just to feel kind of relaxed and comfortable and just almost just take the pressure off. So one of the ways that I use music is if I'm, about to start a talk, I will always have, I'll go into a corporate office or wherever it is, and I'll always take it's like an Anchor, nothing like what you've got set up, but just like a little Anchor Bluetooth stereo.
Yeah.
And I'll be playing some James Brown or, I don't know, some Al Green or something like that, just some chilled out, so because what I found is that there's always that kind of 15 minutes or so beforehand, and there's 2 or 3 people around, and maybe they work in the same organization, but it's a large organization. They don't necessarily know each other, but they know what they're here for. And it's that, well, I've got kind of work to do. I don't want to be rude. Do I really want to talk to you? Do I just want to sit in silence? There's a lot of thinking to be going on that need not be the case.
Yeah.
If you want to relax and just chill and just take on the vibe, then that's fine. So that's one of the ways that I use music.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. But again, it what that's doing there also, it's providing a transition between what people have been doing before to the talk.
Yes.
And often they'll be very busy coming in from a previous meeting or whatever it might be. A few moments of music, whether they like it or not, just resets and then gets you into a different headspace to take on board what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah. I mean, weirdly enough, I never get any complaints, but I think there's a lot to be said there just in terms of when we talk about corporate athletes going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, almost treating ourselves like we're some kind of mechanical device that can just keep going so long as we have oil and a power supply. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. So actually, yeah, the way that you've described that in terms of it acting as a transition from one meeting to another makes a lot of sense, because it definitely has an effect in terms of just putting the room at ease, less of a kind of a light switch from one to the other. So your upcoming book, again, just talking more about music and well-being, which is the name of your upcoming book. It's being released next year, 2026, right? How has music shaped your own sense of self across different phases of living with bipolar?
It's a good question. And I think it's always been important to me. So, when I first started coming to terms with the diagnosis, music was really important. Again, listening to different sorts of music, because for me, music is a very intentional and mindful activity. If you properly listen to music, you can listen to music in the background and do other stuff. But I've always been a fan of actually sitting there with the headphones on, listening to a piece of music and really getting into the different instruments, the phrasing, the vocals, whatever it might be. But I think the best example I can give you was, and again, part of the inspiration for my music and well-being shows was exercise was taken away from me post the pandemic, because I got COVID like everybody else. And then I'm one of these people that's got long COVID, which is the post-viral condition, which effectively means I can't exercise to any level of intensity. I can still walk. I can do.
Sorry, is that to this day?
Yes, same now. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 6 years later or whatever. 5 years later. And I used to be a pretty keen racing cyclist, and as I mentioned, exercise and cycling was a big way that I would stay well.
So this explains the WhatsApp photo.
It explains the WhatsApp photo. Yeah, so for those listening, my WhatsApp photo is me in full lycra with a lawnmower, mowing the grass with a kind of aero helmet on, which it does take a bit of explaining. So my nickname as a cyclist in my cycling club was the mower.
Got you.
Because I used to mow people down, not literally.
Yeah.
So that was the fun bit of image, which I've always kept on WhatsApp. But so post the pandemic, when I recovered, or in lockdown, I recovered from the first bout of COVID. When I started exercising again, I'd get chronic fatigue, headaches, flu-like symptoms, nausea, all sorts of stuff. So if I push myself too hard physically, what I find is that those symptoms will come back. So I can exercise, and I found a balance of what I can do, but it's not any level of intensity. which means if you start looking at the neuroscience, I'm probably not getting the kind of dopamine hit that I would typically have received from exercise. Where else can you get dopamine from? Music. And actually it's a bit more than that, because for me as a DJ, what I started doing was doing mixes again, doing live streams, and then when the world opened up, getting DJ gigs, and now I DJ regularly, and I've got my music show into workplaces. I've kind of replaced what the effects of what I'd get from racing and cycling with music and DJing, and that has been the revelation that helps me kind of stay well, alongside all of the other things that I do to manage well-being.
And when it comes to the science that underpins your book, the research that underpins your book, has there been a piece of science that has genuinely changed how you listen? Because we know that there's a lot of supporting evidence. We've spoke about it already. Evidence that it improves sleep, can even reduce stigma because it helps people tap into empathy before analysis through that kind of shared sense of connection. But so throughout all of these different bits of research, has there been one piece of scientific evidence that's then genuinely helped you reflect and then change how you listen to music?
So, again, not to bore you and our listeners with that word again, but
Sure.
there was a great study it was a macro study that looked at the difference in how music can boost mood, where people would either listen organically to music versus listen intentionally with the express intention of boosting mood. So if we use music intentionally to boost mood, that has a much greater effect on boosting the mood than if we just listen to music passively. Yeah,
sure.
And so for me, that has been the big revelation is, and again, it's kind of informed how I'm structuring the book, but also how I'm using music personally, is that so the book will have a bunch of different chapters on sleep, on stress, on focus, on motivation. And for each of those, what I'll be sharing is my version of a playlist for each of them, to give readers the opportunity to say, okay, Rob's got different music tastes, but let's have a look at the sort of tracks that might work for focus for him, and then go and build your own.
Yes.
For me as an individual, that has really helped me. So, for example, the other day, I had a really repetitive task to do. It was a design task where I'd got the copy, I'd got the template, but for a deck of cards that I've got for Wellbeing Foundations, I've just got to repeat what I was doing. And that can frustrate me. But what I did is I put my kind of focus playlist on, which had got a lot of classical, a lot of ambient, a lot of sort of lo-fi hip-hop type beats that allowed me to shift my focus enough to the music and away from the repetitive task that it quelled the frustration. And that was an example of intentional music listening that helped me get through a task that a lot more efficiently, and certainly in a better mental state than I would have without the music.
Sure. So it kind of comes back to something we mentioned at the top of our conversation in terms of when it comes to being intentional, being clear on the benefit, how it relates to your well-being, i.e., what's your relationship with music, because it's going to be different for everybody in terms of the effect it has and what situation it's going to be kind of relevant in, and essentially why you should do more of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so when people buy this book, what is one thing that you hope readers will do differently in their daily lives after reading it?
The one thing that I hope people will do differently is that point again of using music intentionally to manage different aspects of well-being.
Okay.
To have this as part of their toolkit in managing well-being, not just enjoying the benefits of music that we all get from listening to music that we enjoy, but really using music to go deeper on different aspects of well-being at different times and having that as a toolkit. So I'm hoping people will understand the science in a pretty accessible way, but the calls to action at the end of each chapter are go and build your playlist for stress, go and build your playlist for sleep. And so therefore we've got all of these toolkits that can really help us, that's accessible, that's part of our existing streaming services, just takes a bit of effort, a bit of self-discovery that we can use to better manage our well-being.
Sounds so powerful. I can't wait. What sort of timescale are we talking? 2026, Q1, Q3?
Yeah, I'll be submitting manuscript end of January, and then
Okay.
the whole publishing process goes. So it'll be the end of the summer.
Okay.
2026. It's coming out on Wiley
Yes.
in the US and the UK. It'll be published globally, and there'll be definitely some sort of launch events that we'll get you along to, Matt.
When you imagine the next decade of mental health in the workplace, what does good look like?
So I think when we look to the future of mental health in the workplace, good is where it is understood that mental health is an essential component of human sustainable performance and corporate performance and everything else. I think if we look at the purposes of our corporations, creation of shareholder value is always going to be up there, of course. But my hope is that the health and the prosperity and the ability of humans in those workplaces to thrive, as well as the impact on the planet and sustainability, have increased importance as part of corporate purpose. I think what that translates to, though, is at different levels of management and leadership, a greater understanding that is if we want people to truly perform at their best, we cannot ignore the need to prioritise their well-being. That creates the need for psychological safety. It creates the need for an understanding that well-being isn't a soft and fluffy benefits issue, and it creates a different way of leadership. But my hope and my prediction is that actually leaders coming through will understand this in a greater degree of detail. So then it becomes, okay, if we believe in this, how do we implement it? And how do we implement it in a high performance environment where there may be a perception we do not have time to prioritize well-being? And that's where I think we need to look at personalization. We need to look at individual solutions to well-being, because the one size does not fit all.
No.
And that applies to gym memberships, yoga classes, whatever. They're both brilliant for the people that enjoy those things and they'll get a huge amount of benefit from. Less for the person that might need to be focusing on how they're structuring work, or dealing with a sense of perfectionism, or concern about financial well-being, whatever it might be. So we need solutions that can be tailored to the individual, and we need solutions that actually can help people build well-being into their routine, particularly when they're busy.
Strong. Rob, this has been insightful, inspirational, and truly engaging. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
This has been Wellbeing Talk with myself, Matt Balfour, your guide to more accessible conversations about mental health in the workplace. Be sure to subscribe to the Let's Go Wellbeing YouTube channel, and we'll connect on the next episode.